You're with ABC News. It's 9 a.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. in the West. Leading our bulletin this hour, a dramatic change of policy. Donald Trump announces a 90-day pause for countries hit by higher US tariffs. But China is excluded, escalating a spiralling trade war, and the markets respond. US stocks soar in one of their biggest rallies since the Second World War, following days of tariff turmoil. We'll see how the local share market fares when it opens in the next hour. Also, day 13 of the federal election campaign. Anthony Albanese is in far north Queensland, making a play for a key seat. Meanwhile, Peter Dutton is in Melbourne, trying to make inroads in must-win suburban electorates. Overseas, Gaza officials say at least 29 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a residential building, with 8 children among the dead and dozens more are injured. Also, we'll speak to the New South Wales SES to get an update on the flooding situation in Western New South Wales, where hundreds of people are facing weeks of isolation. It's Thursday, the 10th of April. I'm Dan Borscher from the lands of the Darug people here in Parramatta in Western Sydney. This is ABC News Mornings. After a week of turbulence on global markets and growing fears of the world's largest economy slipping into recession, stocks on Wall Street have surged after the US president suddenly reversed his most crippling tariffs against dozens of countries. The Australian share market is also expected to trade higher today due to the backdown. Less than a day after they came into effect, Donald Trump has announced a 90-day pause on higher import taxes against most nations, but has zeroed in on China, hiking levies against the manufacturing powerhouse to 125%. That's after Beijing fought back and introduced its own retaliatory charges against Washington. The rethink brings most countries in line with the 10% baseline duty, which already applies to Australia.
I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate, because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it. And that's what I did with China, because they did retaliate. So we'll see how it all works out. I think it's going to work out amazing. I think that our country is going to be at the end of a year or shorter, but I think we're going to have something that nobody would have dreamt possible.
The major US indices posted their best day in years following major losses after President Trump outlined his tariff strategy a week ago. Traders say investors now have some certainty, at least in the short term.
This is a massive, massive benefit for consumers, for investors. I think everybody's breathing a sigh of relief because it's been extremely chaotic for the last few days. Obviously, this leaves us with at least 90 days of slightly more stability than we've had, which is great.
Washington's pause does not affect the 25% levy on auto parts, steel and aluminium. Some imports from major US trading partners, Mexico and Canada, will also be subjected to a higher rate. US business owners say they're finding it hard to navigate the constant changes.
We're just trying to analyze it the best we can. We're trying to, make strategic moves as best we can based on the best information. But when it's changing this rapidly, it's just very hard to not feel a little bit of discomfort with what's going on.
Donald Trump says China will face the massive 125% tariff on imports entering the US because of what he calls a, quote, lack of respect the country has shown to the world's markets. Beijing has accused Washington of bullying and blackmail. The trade barrier means the Chinese manufacturer of artificial Christmas trees could be hit with cancellations from the US heading into the factory's busiest time of the year.
This is a trade war between two countries, but China has a very mature and well-established supply chain. We are still confident and believe we will ultimately win this trade war.
For now, Donald Trump's aides insist the 90-day pause on the higher tariffs will force leaders to the bargaining table.
This was his strategy all along, and that you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position they responded. They have shown themselves to the world to be the bad actors, and we are willing to cooperate with our allies and with our trading partners who did not retaliate. It wasn't a hard message. Don't retaliate. Things will turn out well.
The brewing trade war is set to dominate the election campaign again today. Political reporter Jake Evans is on the campaign trail, joining us from Melbourne this morning. Jake, tariffs are set to be high on the agenda for the leaders today.
Good morning, Dan. Yes, as you say, United States President Donald Trump's tariffs have loomed large over this federal election campaign and will do so again today. President Trump's pause won't lift the 10% tax on Australian goods, and so the Prime Minister will remain under pressure to seek a carve-out, something no other nation has managed to win. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese this morning repeating his assertions that the tariffs are not helpful for the global economy and an act of economic self-harm for the United States. Opposition leader Peter Dutton, however, this morning saying the market is volatile, the world is uncertain, and Australia needs a strong leader who can stand up to bullies. Now, the opposition has been seeking daily briefings from government and Treasury on the status of the economy, saying whoever wins government come the May 3 poll needs to be ready to respond quickly to a possible economic downturn, both likely to face further questions on how they'll respond to this ongoing uncertainty today. This morning, the pair, opposition leader Peter Dutton and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, received a letter from the 20 most powerful business groups in the country, urging them to put business on the agenda, saying that Australia needs to make itself more attractive to foreign investment to help cushion itself from a possible economic downturn. Those groups representing retailers, grocers, farmers, energy producers, the tourism sector, a number of others, also made mention of the $143 billion in company taxes that they paid last year. Defence Minister Richard Marles made mention this morning of wherever this heads next, Australia won't be turning to China.
We are focused on building markets and diversifying our trade, as I said. And, we've done a lot more in Southeast Asia, for example, with countries like Indonesia, which is, a massive market that's going to grow right next to us. We're about to sign a new trade agreement with India, which is the biggest country in the world now. We've done a trade agreement with the UAE, which is really the gateway to the Middle East, an important market for Australia. We've doubled our trade with the UK over the last 3 years. So we're focused on diversifying our trade, and yes, we've stabilised our relationship with China, and that's a good thing.
And Jake, you're in Melbourne with Peter Dutton's campaign today. What's he up to?
That's right, yeah. The opposition leader is paying his third visit to Melbourne so far in this campaign. It's a key state, Victoria, for the opposition leader, for both parties, for either of them to have any chance of winning majority government come the May 3 poll. We've seen the opposition leader focus on the party's housing policies on previous visits to Melbourne, in particular the party's migration plans to cut those migration levels, saying that will ease housing pressures. Mr Dutton also expected to detail a $20 billion future fund today that will help to pay for infrastructure, childcare and healthcare services in the regions. This is a seat with a lot of opportunities for Mr Dutton, and if he wants to have any chance of winning government at May 3, he will have to break through the Labor red wall here.
Yeah, meanwhile, Jake, the Prime Minister is in far north Queensland today. What's his focus?
That's right, he's in a bit of a warmer climb than I am. Mr Albanese heading out onto the Great Barrier Reef today. That's in the seat of Leichhardt, a seat that was held by the Coalition on a safe margin, but its MP Warren Entsch is retiring and Labor is hoping it can claim that seat on voting day. Mr Albanese heading out to Green Island in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, where he'll make a $10 million announcement to protect and promote the reef. That includes a $6 million rebate program for schools to send classes on excursions to the reef to learn more about the ecosystem, Dan.
And Jake Evans reporting from Melbourne, updating us on both campaigns today. And we are still on that shot with you. Just while we've got you, have you had a sense of what any of the other politicians have been up to today, as we're seeing, of course, the campaign really ramp into overdrive halfway through the second full week?
Yeah, look, my colleague Lucy Barber, who I think you'll be speaking to shortly, is also out with the National Party on what they call the Wombat Trail. This $20 billion future fund announcement is one of the key policies that they're hoping to spruik this election campaign. The fund would be seeded using receipts from commodities, and the party suggests that would help to develop key infrastructure projects out in the regions, as well as pay for improved healthcare and childcare services. The Wombat Trail doesn't get maybe the TV attention of the major parties, but the politicians on that road are just as active as the Liberal and Labor parties. Look, we don't know if we'll meet up with them again today or not. The parties are pretty secretive about where they head to, but maybe keep an eye out for that one, Dan.
Yeah, indeed, Jake Evans. Appreciate the extra detail this morning. Staying with the tariffs, and North America correspondent Carrington Clark is on Wall Street in New York City and joins us now. Carrington, big moves on the US market overnight. Take us through them.
Yeah, another historic day here on the New York Stock Exchange. Again, furious action with one man at the centre of it. Donald Trump's words and actions are basically dictating investor sentiment here in America. Today, it was to the positive side. What we saw today was an extraordinary increase in the value of stocks. The S&P 500 up almost 10%. That would be a good result over a year in normal times. And the NASDAQ, which is the tech-heavy sector, the tech-heavy indices, it was up by the most it has been since 2001. Quite an extraordinary day. And it was really all about Donald Trump's decision to pause what he has referred to as the reciprocal tariffs on specific countries that just came into play today. So although we had speculation at the start of this week that a potential pause was in the mix, that was knocked down by the White House. They said that was not on the cards. Donald Trump, though, quite an extraordinary about-face today, says that he will allow that 90-day pause in order to do negotiations with countries who he says have been ringing the White House furiously, trying to get time to discuss how they can fix this situation. One notable exception, China will be hit with a 125% tax on all exports to the United States. Donald Trump says that is in part because China responded to earlier tariffs being placed on it by hitting America with tariffs of its own. And so we do have this situation of the world's two biggest economies both going for each other's necks. And that is still going to be bad news for global growth. And the 10% baseline tariff that Donald Trump announced at the same Liberation Day announcement last week, that is still in effect for most countries around the world, including Australia. Australia was only ever hit with that 10%. We weren't going to get a larger reciprocal tariff, but now basically all countries around the world are going to be hit by that 10%. Investors think this is good news, that we've moved back from the brink of what was looking like a very dangerous global trade war, but we are still facing a situation where America has higher barriers to trade. That is still bad news for global growth. The question, of course, is what can be negotiated in the next 90 days and whether or not an agreement can be struck between China and America. Australia has a huge amount of skin in the game when it comes to Chinese growth. If China starts to slow markedly, that's going to make it much more difficult for Australia to export to China. And it still means here in America, consumers are going to be paying at least 10% more for most imports. So that is going to push up prices, but just not as much as was originally planned.
Carrington Clark reporting from Wall Street in New York City. And we are hoping to take you to an academic in China a little later in the show to get some analysis on what we're seeing and what is being seen there as well. But back home now, and a coalition government is pledging to set aside billions of dollars to improve services and infrastructure in the bush. The Nationals say a Dutton-Littleproud government would establish 2 new future funds to help bring down debt and provide services in rural areas. National Regional Affairs reporter Lucy Barber has more from the Wombat Trail in Darwin.
The Coalition will be out today spruiking its Future Generations Fund and the Regional Australia Future Fund. The money for these funds will come from windfall receipts in the federal budget. So that's where the amount of revenue raised in the budget from high commodity prices for iron ore, for example, exceeds what was projected. About 25% of that 80% windfall would go specifically to the Regional Australia Future Fund. It would pay out a $1 billion dividend each year to programs across the bush. So local councils, for example, could apply for money to improve access to healthcare, to childcare, to fill in potholes, to build a bridge, all sorts of things. A good example of this is where a council could apply for money for a community-funded daycare to pay for more educators, so that would therefore increase the amount of kids that they could teach at a local daycare centre in a small rural town. The Coalition, when it was in government previously, had what's called the Building Better Regions Fund. That money went to councils, for example, to do such things. But Labor scrapped it when it came to government and accused the Coalition of having used that fund for pork barrelling. David Littleproud, the Nationals leader, has dismissed any suggestion that that's what this fund could be used for.
We are the forgotten Australians, but what I want to do is make sure I leave a legacy that we're not the political football any longer. Where Labor gets in, they cut everything. We get in, we have to square the ledger, and effectively we get labelled as a pork barrelers. What I want to do is leave a legacy that it shouldn't matter who's in the lodge. Regional Australia has a secure set of funding above and beyond what we get to fill in the holes that are being left by governments that don't understand regional Australia. That's the legacy I want to leave behind, and this fund will deliver it.
Mr Littleproud says this particular fund would have to be legislated and it would exist in perpetuity.
And Susie Teagan is the Chief Executive of the National Rural Health Alliance and joins us now. Susie, how could this fund help improve access to healthcare in the bush? Are there some examples that are tangible that you can give us?
Oh, look, this is a fantastic initiative. We're really pleased about the release of this information. 2/3 of Australia's income comes from rural, remote and regional Australia, and 50% of the tourism income, despite the fact that they are only 30% of the population. And this sort of funding is about time. We have not had people looking after rural, remote and regional Australia. They are the economic powerhouse for Australia, and they have had to do without for so long. Local government and communities will benefit from such a fund. We know that many local governments and communities are having to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure that they can keep their health and medical workforce, that they can keep the local educators, and there is an opportunity for housing for medical and health students, allied health students. There's also funding for those clinics to expand and work in other regions in the area, and it also be able to be allocated to childcare, which is one of the biggest issues for those frontline workers. And so it is just a positive. It's my birthday today, and this was just a wonderful way to wake up this morning. It's about time that rural, remote and regional Australia is looked after. They make up 7.3 million people and they've been left behind. And they're dealing with droughts, floods and fires. This infrastructure funding is something that we've all been asking for. And rural, remote and regional Australia deserves this and more.
Well, Susie, a happy birthday to you. Give us a sense of what you're hearing from regional, remote and rural Australia about the state of healthcare and, in fact, childcare and some of the experiences that you're hearing, because I was in Tennant Creek a couple of months ago at the end of last year where I grew up, and the thing that I kept hearing was about how the infrastructure needed work. There was difficulties getting and holding on to doctors and nurses and health professionals right across the board, which then has a flow-on effect to the way that primary health care is delivered.
Well, I can't understand why we expect rural communities that are bringing in all of that income for the rest of Australia to enjoy and have kept us out of 2 financial crises, is expected to raise funds after they've paid their taxes, they've paid their Medicare levy, they work in the industries that are bringing in the money for the rest of Australia, and yet they're expected to do more capital raising, more fundraising, so that they get the basic services. Currently, there is a $6.55 billion underspend of healthcare in rural Australia compared to the city. So if you live out of the city, you're getting $850 less health expenditure than you are if you live in the city. Now, we're an equitable country. Rural Australia is not a third world country, and so we need to start treating people equitably. And healthcare is crucial, because if healthcare fails, you can't have industry, you can't have education. So those communities are working together with industry, they're working together with the healthcare workforce, and they are, they're pulling their hair out, they are stressed and stretched, and then they're being told that they need to be resilient. I mean, it's just a joke. And so this funding is going to be amazing. So I'm really hoping that all sides of Parliament, and we don't care whom we work with at the National Rural Health Alliance, but we hope that all parties and all politicians start looking after their cousins, aunts, uncles and parents that live in rural, remote and regional Australia, because they deserve the same healthcare access, the same childcare access and the same education access that people in the city do. And this is about equity and it's about parity.
How would you expect this fund to work? Because one of the big challenges would have to be prioritising the level of need across many different parts of the nation.
True, but we've got communities that are already working with local industry, with the education system, the health system, and they're all sitting around the table. I mean, I look at communities such as Mareeba up in Queensland, Kimber in South Australia, and Bogan Shire in New South Wales, and they're sitting around the table trying to prioritise what the need is for their communities. And anyone saying that, they're going to take everything for granted and they're going to rip the system off, they're not receiving enough money at the moment. They're not even receiving equitable funding. So don't make them jump through hoops. Don't make them justify why they deserve it when they're not even receiving equitable funding in the first place. And so they are very good at working together. They don't have to work separately like you do in the city, because in the city you can afford to work separately. These communities are driven, are positive, they're focused, and they know what their needs are. And, I can see the funding being prioritised in those communities, and then they will go through a process of being able to access childcare or growing a clinic or providing accommodation for medical and health students, because at the moment they can't get that. I mean, I had one medical student tell me the other day that there was no accommodation where they want to train for the next year, and so they had to leave their family in the city despite the fact that they wanted to work in rural Australia because there was no accommodation available. Now, paying $40,000 rent in the city for his family and then having to pay extra rent in the country, it doesn't make sense. No wonder people don't want to go there. And so this really makes sense. It's a really positive move, and I'm hoping it's the start of many other initiatives, because rural, remote and regional Australia has been forgotten, and it's about time they start being recognised for the great powerhouse that they are.
And just finally, what's to prevent this money from being used for pork barrelling in coalition seats like we saw with sports rorts?
Oh, my God. I mean, why do we straight away start looking at the negative of everything? I was saying before, there is an underfunding of rural Australia in the first place. Rural Australia has not had any initiatives from any sides in this debate leading up to the election. It's about time you start funding rural Australia, and it's about time that we continue to fund rural Australia, because they don't have enough votes in those regions. And I was told recently by a politician, oh, there aren't enough votes in the country. Well, you know what? These people, we rely on these people to bring in Australia's economic wealth. Let's just think about how we can support them to do better. If rural Australia were a company and 30% of your company was bringing in 2/3 of the Australian export income and 50% of the tourism income and 90% of the food Australians eat, I would throw all my money at them, because we want them to do well for the rest of Australia.
Susie Teagan, Chief Executive of the National Rural Health Alliance, thanks for your company this morning.
Thank you.